This is Jessica Dunn, and this is Finance 610. Today we're going to cover Chapter 10 in your Seedman text, and this chapter is about revolving loan funds, often abbreviated RLF. A revolving loan fund is a tool to fix financing gaps, just like most of the things we've talked about in this course. It is used for development and expansion of small businesses for the most part. A revolving loan fund is a self-replenishing pool of money. So the organization would provide a loan. The principal and interest on the loan would be repaid to that organization, which would go back into the pool of money and could be lent again. So interest and principal payments from old loans would be used to issue new loans. So as long as the loans that are being made are good quality, then the pool of money should grow over time because it would be recouping its principal that it lent out plus any interest charged on that money. So the majority of revolving loan funds support local businesses. Some have specific goals such as healthcare, minority business development, or environmental cleanup. And here are some links. To the Economic Development Administration. And here is their revolving loan fund section. And here we see success stories of revolving loan funds. So you can click on each one of these and it will give you a short couple paragraphs about a company that successfully received a revolving loan fund loan and was able to use that. You can also find the organizations that provide revolving loans within an area. We are in the Purchase Area Development, under the Purchase Area Development District, and they offer revolving loan funds. And this is their link. So we have access to revolving loan funds in our geographic location. I've also provided a video that discusses revolving loan funds as well.
It was a terrible time again to make investments. 2008 was even worse than 2001 was, but it was the best move we ever made, and I think a lot of it is because of the help we got from people like FCEDC. Ziegler Enterprises was started in 1972 by Fred Ziegler. In 1998, Fred was looking to sell the business, and myself and some private investors knew of Fred and knew Fred's business because we were customers of F. Ziegler. So we started to discuss with him the opportunity to buy the business, and in November of 1998, we purchased the business from Fred. We continued to grow the business and expand the business, and 3 years ago in October of 2008, we had the opportunity to move into this building and continue to grow the business. The business is 10 times larger than it was when we purchased it from Fred.
We take a lot of time to really listen to our customers and develop programs and services catered specifically to their needs. A lot of what we do is revolving around vendor managed inventory programs with our customers, which allows us to take lead times from what might have been 120 days historically down to 3 weeks.
We're also looking, as we moved in here, to make more investments in machine tools. And we had one large piece of equipment that we brought in of another capability and capacity that we didn't have, and we were able to bring that in through a revolving loan fund.
Our revolving loan funds, RLFs, are made possible by payments made other loans throughout the years. We provide gap financing. What that is financing the gap between what the client can provide through their own sources or through funding sources that they may have, a bank or other financial institution. The last 5 years, we've done about $5.2 million of loans through the RLF. This should lead to an expected investment of private investment of about $30 million.
At first, I thought they were just a money channel to get state and federal money to businesses, but I was proven in a real short period of time that's not the case. They provide the full portfolio of services for companies like our small companies.
We have assisted some amazing companies over the years. One of my favorite parts of my job is being out on my site visits where I get to see these products that are made right here in Fond du Lac County.
So revolving loan funds are unregulated. The organization gets to decide how to distribute this cash and who to distribute it to. If the loan does not default, the RLF will grow over time because they're not only receiving the principal that they lent, they're also receiving the interest payments from that loan. However, this should not be a substitution for commercial lending. Generally, revolving loan funds work in conjunction with a bank loan. So, for a bank to finance a project, it may be too risky for the bank. And so, if an organization with a revolving loan with a pool of money offering revolving loan funds steps in and finances a portion of that, it makes it less risky for the bank. So they're often used in conjunction with other forms of financing, even equity. So they may require that the owner contribute a portion of the cost. But the continuation of the fund does depend upon the collection of existing loans. So if the organization makes bad loans, then the pool of capital will decrease. So here's a graphical picture of this. So the revolving loan fund can be funded through many different sources, primarily cash in the form of grants or in the form of debt. So to fund a revolving loan fund, an organization could get a loan from a bank. That is the more expensive option because that debt does have to be repaid. So it is putting some restrictions upon the RLF. The organization is going to have to make loans that they know are good to very creditworthy people to ensure that they have cash on hand to repay the debt that they owe. And they are going to have to charge higher interest rates because they are having to pay interest on the money that they have. Grants are much cheaper. Grants, that's just basically free money from the government. So the organization would apply for a grant. They would be given usually a one-time cash contribution, and that would not have to be repaid. And so that opens the door for many different projects, some that may be very risky and some that may have a large social impact but a small financial return because, again, they're not having to repay the debt that they have borrowed. So once the revolving loan fund is funded either through grants or debt, the organization is then able to make loans. So the borrowers would receive the loans and then they would begin repayment of the loans, both principal and interest. So why do we need revolving loan funds? We already have loan guarantees, and we have the Community Reinvestment Act, which requires banks to make riskier loans. So why do we need revolving loan funds too? First off, banks are constrained because of safety and soundness regulations. Risky assets negatively impact ratings. So we talked about their CAMELS ratings before. These revolving loan funds are unregulated. They do not impact CAMELS ratings. They're not affected by CRA requirements. Number two, with the other programs, some areas are still left out because of information costs. Very small and very specialized firms, it's costly to gather information about these companies. And so they're often left out from loan guarantees and the CRA simply because they have very high information costs. And some projects have large social impacts but small financial returns. There's not a huge incentive for a bank to invest in these projects. And a revolving loan fund, especially a grant-funded revolving loan fund, would have the ability to invest in these projects and hope that there is any sort of return that could come back to them. It wouldn't even have to have a return at all if they didn't require the revolving loan fund to continue in the future. So revolving loan funds are unregulated. Not being subject to CRA regulations would allow an RLF to focus on individuals other than those required by the CRA, like the low middle income individuals. These middle to upper income individuals are often overlooked by other programs. So they may have a very risky idea, but because they're higher income, the CRA is not forcing banks to lend to them. So they're kind of overlooked. But because they're unregulated, they also don't have to meet safety and soundness standards, which can cause a problem because the regulations are there to make sure loans are good. So these may not be high quality loans. It also reduces accountability, and so it could increase the potential for poor credit decisions, which would, if it is a poor credit decision, then the principal and interest will likely not be repaid, which would cause the revolving loan fund to be depleted. Grants are important to revolving loan funds because they don't have to be repaid, and because no repayment is required, revolving loan funds can lend to riskier individuals. The primary source of grants are from the federal government. And if we look at this table, we can look at where cash is coming from by agency. And we see that the largest revolving loan fund, the total amount in grants given to revolving loan funds, the greatest of those would be the Economic Development Administration, the Department of Agriculture, but the largest by far is the HUD, Housing and Urban Development. But there are 6 federal programs that administer grants to capitalize economic development revolving loan funds. So they're providing grants to local revolving loan funds. Studies show that the average revolving loan fund is small and they charge below market interest rates. Most revolving loan funds are primarily there to provide technical assistance. Governments and nonprofits are usually those that run a RLF. So how are RLFs evaluated? We already know that they're unregulated, that there's not a lot of oversight on them. So how could we determine if they are performing well? First step would be the cost per job created or retained. So how much money are they spending per job? A good way to think about it would be, are we spending, $1 million in RLF funds to retain 1,000 jobs, 1,000 high-paying jobs? Then that might be a good idea. Or are we spending $1 million to retain 10 minimum wage workers? Probably not a great idea. So it's measuring efficiency in achieving economic development goals. If we're spending more than the job pays to save it, then it was probably not a good decision. a leverage ratio. So we could look at the amount that the RLF has contributed to a project compared to the amount that has come from banks. It has come from other lenders, co-lenders, how much the firm has gotten elsewhere. It is measuring the RLF's effectiveness in securing co-lenders. So that would, if they're making good credit decisions, then it should be easy to obtain co-lenders in projects. Again, if you're able to invest a small portion and find a co-lender, that frees up more money for additional projects. And then finally, the loan default rate. Default rate should be higher with the revolving loan fund than for banks because RLFs are making riskier loans. The biggest challenge that an RLF will face is the difficulty in creating a revolving loan fund that is large enough to generate a sizable impact. So you're going to need a whole lot of money. And remember, when you're making these loans, these are going to be long-term loans. You're probably 15-year average. So you're making these loans with a 15-year maturity. And so that means that if you make a whole bunch of loans today, then you can't make any more loans for 10 to 15 years because you haven't recouped enough principal and interest repayment to make additional loans. So they do need to be very large and perhaps even continual. I mean, receiving multiple grants over time, so that way you can sustain your loan fund pool. Administrators of an RLF need to set priorities and then determine the best allocation of funds. Profitability is important because money must be returned to the fund so it can be lent out again. But we can shape our RLF through different policies. First up, we have targeting policies. This would define the type of businesses that the RLF funds. They should reflect economic development goals and should focus on businesses that cannot find capital elsewhere. Most targeting policies are going to fall into one of four categories. First would be industry or sector. So they're going to lend to a particular industry, for example, manufacturing. Second would be business ownership. So is it minority owned, women owned? Third would be geographic. So is it perhaps revitalizing a poor area? Or is it perhaps in a poor community? So is it like maybe in Eastern Kentucky? And then finally would be farm stage. So are we investing in startups? Are we helping aging companies to revitalize and continue to grow? What are our policies? Who do we want to help? Next up, financial policies. These set the loan products and financing terms. So it's going to define credit terms, the loan size, what interest rates we're charging, repayment terms, and it's specifically looking at the trade-off between maximizing economic development and enhancing financial sustainability. If we were to provide loans with low interest rates and long maturities, this would reduce the cash flow that we have in our revolving loan fund. So we would have lower future capital levels in our revolving loan fund if we charged really low rates and had long repayment schedules. So we do need to balance our economic development goals and the financial stability of the firm. And again, our interest rates are going to be determined on, one of the ways they're going to be determined is how our revolving loan fund pool is financed. If it's coming from grants, that is free money from the government, so we can charge very low interest rates. If our revolving loan fund pool is funded through debt, we are paying interest on that debt as the agency, and so we're going to be required to charge higher interest rates than the bank is charging us, so that we can, at a minimum, repay what we owe. Third up is capital policies. This would define what type of financing an RLF can provide. So it's shaping the amount and type of capital available to lend. A RLF funded with grants has no repayment to make. They have greater flexibility and can offer lower rates and longer terms. If it is funded with debt, they have a floor to their interest rates that they may charge. So we're going to have to link our lending programs with debt repayments. An RLF must have $2 million at a minimum to be sustainable. Most RLFs have assets below $1 million. Grant funds help. They do allow high-risk lending and flexible repayment options, but there are limited grant resources or grant sources. RLFs that rely solely on grants must be very creative to cultivate new grant sources to expand their capital without debt. Most RLFs need to alter their capital policies and attract non-grant capital to become sustainable. Underwriting criteria. This is establishing our risk criteria. Some RLFs do not have formal underwriting policies and rely on the expertise of RLF staff to evaluate loans. This non-bureaucratic approach is appealing, but it leaves lending policies and the quality and consistency of loans on the skills of a few individuals. So you're looking at people who may or may not be highly trained. They are certainly not being regulated. And so you're putting a lot of faith on a few individuals to make good loans. So there needs to be some standard here. So we're looking at the risk that we're exposed to. So there needs to be some standard for economic development. We need to set some minimum qualifications. So maybe the threshold for RLF loan dollars per job created or retained. So we may require that we only lend X amount of dollars per job created or retained. We may even require that businesses hire locally. The capacity to achieve business and financial targets. Can an RLF loan be repaid? So is the company going to be successful enough? Are we making a high enough quality loan for them to repay their loan to allow the RLF to continue to be funded? So does the business have a business plan? Do they have any historic performance? Do they have experience? Any special skills? And finally, there's financial risk. So we might look at the company's loan-to-value ratio, their debt service coverage ratio, any loan guarantees they may have, any co-signers. Next up is development services. This is determining technical assistance available. So development services would help individuals develop financial plans, develop business plans, help with bookkeeping assistance. And so all of these different services, there is no income being driven from these sources, but they would allow a company to perhaps be more eligible for a bank loan in the future because they now have these different skills. Finally, we look at relationship policies. Referral networks help RLFs market programs and secure quality financing requests. This is focusing on building key relationships. And so how do these different policies work together? We have our first tier policies. These are our targeting policies. They're going to shape all of our others. Second tier, these policies advance targeting goals and are complementary. And then we have our third tier policies, underwriting and relationship building policies. So capital policies must raise the correct type and amount of funds required to support the financial services offered, and to get their desired results. Financing policies need to work within the goals and constraints of capital policies. Development services should be tailored to generate demand and prepare potential borrowers for the type of financing supplied by the revolving loan fund. Relationship building activities are crafted to form collaborations that are critical to financial, capital, and development service policies. Underwriting policies translate targeting and financial policies into more detailed lending standards. There are some difficulties with this. First up is formulating a strategy to maximize impact with limited capital. So you only have a finite amount of money. What's the best punch we can throw? Where can we get the most impact with the least dollars? Balancing economic development goals with financial objectives. So we do need to make sure that our revolving loan fund is sustainable, that we're making good quality loans, charging interest, and so that way we are able to continue to make loans in the future. And sometimes that doesn't mesh well with our economic development goals, because oftentimes our economic development goals are asking for social things that have very small financial returns. Third, establishing an effective origination, underwriting, and approval process. So maybe we don't need to rely on just one or two people to decide yes or no on a loan. Maybe we need a formal underwriting process that is ensuring that our borrowers are creditworthy and they will repay the money that they have borrowed. Another difficulty would be providing quality technical assistance. It's often difficult to find people who have the know-how that are willing to work as required for this, because it would be difficult to have someone sitting in an office all day waiting for someone to come in and ask a technical assistance question. People aren't going to be there all the time, and it would be very expensive, and it's a drain on your revolving loan fund pool of money. Because now you would have someone on payroll who has to be there all the time waiting to answer questions. Another difficulty would be building strong relationships. Once you have a loan from an individual, the chances that they're going to need a second loan may be small, and that those requests will come back through the same agency. And finally, securing sufficient and appropriate capital to be sustainable is probably the largest difficulty that an RLF faces. Because again, you need roughly $2 million to have a sizable impact at all. And that's a lot of cash, and you're wanting to make risky loans that may not be repaid back. So you need reoccurring capital, and you're needing the appropriate type of capital. So everyone's dream would be to have it financed through grants, but they may be reliant upon debt.